A note before we start, the crime at the heart of this episode is child sexual abuse, and while I do not delve into any of the details, it still might be upsetting to some listeners. Please take care. Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking, they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. Margaret Thatcher, the so-called Iron Lady of British politics, was not going to let this go. From almost the day she was first installed as Prime Minister in 1979 to her final day of serving in that role, she repeatedly had her private secretaries lobby for Jimmy Savile to be knighted by the Queen. Apparently, that's a tradition there. In Britain, the Prime Minister submits a list of names for the monarch to approve. And by the 1980s, Savile was widely regarded as a national treasure. Thatcher was certain the eccentric broadcaster and tireless fundraiser deserved the honor. She also considered him a friend. He joined her at holiday gatherings and even spent a weekend with her at Chequers, the official prime ministerial residence outside London. But when the PM first mentioned this knighthood matter to her advisors, they were not as enthusiastic. According to memos exchanged between her and her minions, one of her counselors reminded her that Savile was a strange and complex man and advised against putting him forward. Another warned of unfortunate revelations in the press and suggested those lurid details shouldn't be tied to her name. But she persisted. Here's Lord Robin Butler, her private secretary.
Their relationship was pretty close. He was writing letters to her. She had invited him to the Prime Minister's country residence, Chequers. Margaret Thatcher particularly liked Jimmy Savile because he wasn't relying on what the state could do.
In 1986, two of her staffers exchanged a note which read, quote, "She wonders how many more times his name is to be pushed aside, especially in view of all the great work he had done for Stoke Mandeville," end quote. Stoke Mandeville was, and still is, Britain's leading hospital for spinal injury care. Savile had famously raised £10 million for the construction of a new building on the site, a massive gift to the country's National Health Service. It was the kind of gift that caused her people to relent. In 1990, just as Thatcher's reign was ending, Queen Elizabeth II knighted Jimmy Savile. Neither woman knew that they would come to regret the decision. Well, at least the Queen would. By the time the truth came out, Thatcher was struggling with dementia. Still, within both of their lifetimes, Savile would be unmasked as perhaps the country's most prolific pedophile. The revelations were more than just one man's crimes. They forced Britain to confront how a predator managed to hide in plain sight for half a century, shielded by his fame and indulged by institutions that should have protected the vulnerable. Government agencies, the BBC, the NHS, the press, all had chances to stop him, and all failed. In the end, Savile had to die for his victims to feel safe enough to speak. When they finally stepped forward, there were nearly 500 of them. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Galatea. Scott and I took a little mountainside getaway recently to reset and recharge. No deadlines, no alarms, just books and quiet.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time reading, staring at trees, and pretending we weren't checking work email.
I did okay on that front, but between work, errands, and whatever the group chat is spiraling about these days, life rarely slows down, so I brought something that did help me unwind. Galatea.
That's that romance reading app, right?
Yep, Galatea is a reading app where anyone craving a little me time can dive into a library of romance stories that leave you feeling recharged and fulfilled. We're talking over 1,000 titles, everything from slow burn fantasy to forbidden love to bad boy billionaires.
So you're saying while I was reading about ghosts, you were reading about smoldering glances and forbidden love?
Exactly. It's called Balance.
Sounds like I might need to download that app for our next trip.
Right now, Galatea is offering our listeners an extra 25% off of an already irresistibly affordable subscription when you go to galatea.com/COTC. That's GALATEA.com/COTC to indulge in unlimited stories for even less. Galatea.com/COTC. Jimmy Savile was a beloved funny man, chronic do-gooder, cigar-chomping, tracksuit-wearing, googly-eyed everyman, a bit of an itinerant vagabond and the quirky darling of the British nation from the mid-1960s until his death in 2011. That's a long time to be beloved. Savile was born in Leeds on Halloween 1926, the youngest of 7 children in a working-class family helmed by parents Vincent and Agnes. Jimmy would tell journalists he wasn't particularly close to his father, who died in 1953 of cancer. But his lifelong devotion to his mother became one of the defining features of his public persona. He famously called her the Duchess. Like a lot of young adults, he knocked around a bit, later saying he earned a living for a time doing some professional wrestling. In fact, he told reporters he'd been in 107 pro fights, and it was there he learned to not allow himself any personal feelings. He also boasted about having gangster connections. Whether or not those tales were true, they fed into the myth of Jimmy Savile, hustler, survivor, and showman. During World War II, he worked a stint as a Bevan boy coal miner. He would later claim that it was while he labored in the dark recesses of the earth that he decided he needed to work at something bigger and more suited to his personality. The 2022 Netflix documentary, Jimmy Savile, A British Horror Story, includes an interview with him in which he explained how he decided on his life's work.
And it all started very quickly, I won't bore you. Some years ago when I wondered what to do and I wasn't quite sure what to do. And this is where I started working things out for myself. I thought, well, I'll work it the other way around. Instead of thinking of something to do, i.e. a job, I will work out the things that I like and the things that suit me, I'll see if there's any jobs around those things. I like lights, I like records, pop music, I like girls.
So even while working underground by day, he started playing records in the dance halls of northern England by night. He judiciously built his career, moving to radio, then to television, which was just beginning to understand the spending power of a younger market. Following on the heels of the success of Dick Clark's American Bandstand, Savile was named the host of the BBC's similarly formatted Top of the Pops in 1964. The show invited British bands to perform while teenagers, mostly girls, danced to the live music, as well as to the latest chart-topping hits. It became a regular home to the likes of Chubby Checker, the Beatles, Stevie Wonder, and the Rolling Stones, eventually introducing Britain to Barry Manilow and, much later, Green Day. Savile's rather flamboyant character was more than a little naughty, but at the same time so zany as to be somehow acceptable to generations of his countrymen. This is getting far ahead of myself, but in his obituary in the New York Times, I found a pretty apt description of him. Quote, "On the air, he served up patter that in its opacity verged on dada. He also yodeled. Often." End quote. A lovable oddball and all-around cad. and that was the sell. In 1965, he presented himself as a volunteer at Leeds General Infirmary in his hometown and at the Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Buckinghamshire. He was remarkably helpful, acting as a kind of ad hoc porter, shuttling patients between ambulances, rooms, and procedures for x-rays or treatments. He allowed the media to follow him on a few occasions, but according to hospital staffers, nurses, doctors, and other porters, he was almost religious in his attendance, coming twice a week, and clearly dedicated to the volunteering beyond the media spotlight. Around this time, another institution opened its doors to Savile. Amidst all the fan mail he was getting from his growing television fame, Savile received a note from a patient at Broadmoor Hospital asking the TV presenter if he'd come to the hospital and attend a party there. Along with the invite came a little wooden plaque, a Brazil nut on a little plank inscribed with Nutter's Ink. The note said that the folks at the hospital had elected him to their elite society. Broadmoor was a 100-year-old asylum for the criminally insane. The patients considered Jimmy one of them. As expected, Savile played this for laughs. He told people the note read, quote, "You are one of us. We have sussed that out. You are an honorary member," end quote. Get it? It's a funny joke because those inside the prison included paranoid schizophrenics and mass murderers. Still, Savile got official permission to go to the fete, and then, because he told the people in charge that he liked talking to those housed there, he began to come more frequently. He began visiting in the 1970s. By the 1980s, his access had expanded dramatically. Broadmoor made him honorary assistant entertainment officer and, astonishingly, gave him a small attic suite and even a set of keys that let him wander the 53-acre compound. Savile was so sure of his value to the hospital that he considered his work a kind of therapy for their male and female charges. He occasionally parked his motorhome on the premises and invited inmates in to visit. He also brought his Rolls-Royce to the hospital grounds, taking patients on rides away from the facility so they could mingle amongst the townsfolk. Marjorie Wallace, a reporter for the Sunday Times, went to the prison to profile June and Jennifer Gibbons, grown twins who had never spoken to anyone but each other. When they were teenagers, they had gone on a 5-week arson, vandalism, and petty crime spree, ensuring that a large portion of their lives would be spent at Broadmoor. Wallace later recalled that once, when she was sitting with the women at an outdoor table, Savile came up and pointed to one of the women and said, "I'll have you first. And you," he said, pointing to the other twin, "second." Wallace was shocked, but could find nothing more to back up her concerns. Wallace later wrote the sisters' biography, The Silent Twins, which was published first in 1986. It would be later learned that the incidences of Savile's abuse of those at the prison had not just been limited to the prisoners, but also included staff members and visitors to the institution. The staffers would later say that everyone knew he was a sex pest, but that complaints, when made, were ignored by management. The nurses and guards would often warn one another about him, but it went no further. Savile added BBC's Radio 1 to his list of work obligations in 1968. He dyed his straw-like hair a bottle blonde shade that was neither platinum nor sun-kissed. It remained that way the rest of his life. The BBC fell in love with him. Top of the Pops was pulling as many as 20 million viewers a week, and he soon added a few talk shows to his credit so that by the 1970s, he was on British television several times a week, serving up his brand of outrageous humor and on-the-road charity shenanigans. The latter included jogging through the British Isles in gym shorts, followed by news reporters raising money for hospitals and various other needy institutions. He professed to have no social life. He said he was not cut out for marriage, that he preferred many ladies to just one, alluding with ribaldry to a prolific sex life. No one could honestly say they knew him. Tina Davey, his secretary for a time at the BBC, said he told her once that he was a machine. Here's Davey talking over B-roll of Savile greeting swarms of screaming fans.
He didn't talk about his personal life. He was a complete enigma.
The only close bond anyone could see was with his mother Agnes, with whom he would frequently share seaside vacations. An older sister appeared much later on a show called This Is Your Life on the segment that celebrated her youngest brother. She told how he fell out of a carriage as a toddler and became quite ill. Their mother tended to him night and day, never willing to give up on him getting better. The sister remembered that the doctor was so sure that Jimmy couldn't be cured, he told Agnes that he, the doctor, was leaving the hospital. He instructed her to let him know when Jimmy died. The sister insisted that, as if by miracle, Jimmy went to sleep one night and woke up normal. Thereafter, the little boy and his mother were inseparable. She raised him staunchly Catholic, and the pair went to regular Mass. She saw to it that he went to confession every week. He went on to live with her far past the time he should have gone out on his own. He routinely joked that the Duchess would have killed any girl he brought home, so he never bothered. When she died in 1972, Savile famously stayed with her dead body for 5 days before the funeral. By this time, he was a famous person, so the nation watched him grieve. It was the only time anyone said they could remember seeing him cry. By then, his charity work was extending to Duncroft-approved school in Surrey, a government-certified residential school for bright but emotionally disturbed teenage girls. Karen Ward, who would later write a memoir called Victim Zero, was a student at the school. This is an interview she did with an investigator employed by ITV.
Jimmy Savile used to come to Duncroft. He used to take us girls out. We loved it when he came. Everybody knew he was a perv, and everybody knew that he was going to be groping and wanting sex and wanting other worse things than just plain sex. But he brought lots of nice things with him. We got nice food when Jimmy was coming, and we got lots of cigarettes. He used to bring about 1,000 cigarettes with him at the time, and of course cigarettes was the currency in that kind of environment. So girls just flocked around him, and he bought sweeties, and sometimes he bought perfume, and he bought makeup. A lot of things were duty-free. And he just lavished gifts on everybody and was all jolly. And then he wanted people to come out for a ride with him in his car.
If the girls reported anything, and there exist no records to that effect, they said they were ignored, or it was all just written off as Jimmy being Jimmy, no harm, no foul. Most said nothing. It was the price they paid for a little freedom. Around the time that this was happening, in March 1971, there was a blip in the news. 15-year-old Top of the Pops dancer Claire McAlpine had died by overdose. She'd been at the BBC studio when a runner whispered an invitation to her and one of her girlfriends to join the DJs and Jimmy to continue the party after the show. The two girls went, but Claire's girlfriend grew uncomfortable and left. Claire stayed and was invited back again. After a few weeks of quote-unquote visits, the contents of which she confided in her diary, she feared she might be pregnant. Her worried mother read her diary and was preparing to confront the higher-ups at the BBC. She never got the chance. A month after Claire's mother found the diary, Claire died of an overdose of sleeping pills with her diary by her side. Claire's mother went public. A few headlines followed. The BBC, upon learning of the diary allegations, did nothing. When Savile was interviewed by the Daily Express on the day of the inquest into Claire's death, he said, quote, "Many a time I have dated a good-looking girl I've met on the show, But what I say to them is, ask your folks if I can come round for tea. I much prefer being with a family with a pretty girl in the center than a session in the back of my car. For one thing, you can't see how pretty the girl is in the back of my car." End quote. See what he did there? It will be his predictable reaction whenever the topic came up of any suspected indecency with the underaged. Deflect, make jokes. If pushed, say that someone is out to make a dime off of blackmail. Watch the nation pay no attention. On the first day of 1972, Savile was awarded an Order of the British Empire for his valuable work in support of the Commonwealth and for distinguished charitable work to hospitals and charities. The Queen did the honors. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Beam Dream. After we got back from that mountainside trip, I realized how much better I sleep when I'm not juggling a dozen things. So now I'm bringing that same calm home every night with my cup of Beam Dream.
Wait, are we talking about that sleepy cocoa you drink before bed?
Exactly. Dream is made with clean, science-backed ingredients like reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin. Formulated to help you fall asleep fast, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. No grogginess, no crash, just deep restorative rest.
And this is the stuff that actually tastes good, right?
Oh yeah, my favorite flavor is brownie batter. It's smooth, chocolatey, and part of my nightly wind down.
Okay, but you said there was a cyber sale?
I didn't say that, but I'll say it now. Right now, my listeners get up to 50% off, and with my code COTC, you can grab Dream for just $32.50. That breaks down to only $1.08 per night for the best sleep of your life. Go to shopbeam.com/COTC and use code COTC and don't miss out. This is the lowest price Dream has ever been sold anywhere and will likely sell out quickly.
$1.08 a night for better sleep? That's a no-brainer.
Go to shopbeam.com/COTC and use code COTC now. As a young boy, Murray Jones spent time at Duncroft-approved school because his aunt was the headmistress. The place looked like a stately English home, but it was also ringed with bars on the windows. Jones recalled being told that some of the girls inside had committed serious crimes, arson, assault, even murder, and most were heavily medicated. Yet when the family was out, his parents sometimes let the girls babysit him. It seemed to him that the folks working there were rather complacent about the purported mission, to care for very troubled young women. Jones survived that early foray there. Later, when he arrived as a teenager, he noticed that the school had a very famous visitor, Jimmy Savile. He said the great man would pile girls into his open-top car and take them for rides. There were no chaperones, no nurses with them. Just Savile and the extremely vulnerable teens racing into the fields beyond the school. 16-year-old Jones thought that was mighty suspicious. By 1975, Savile had a new platform. He and BBC producers had come up with a genius concept for a new show for him called Jim'll Fix It. The idea was that children would write in their wishes and Savile would work some magic to make those wishes come true. Want to meet Captain Kirk from Star Trek? Jim could arrange that. Want to take your teacher to a 5-star meal complete with limo ride? Jim could make it happen. Want your pet duck to actually fly? Jim will put the two of you on a private plane.
From Lynn Tapsell, age 11, of 20 Falling Lane, Useley, Middlesex. Dear Jimmy, I have always wanted to see Rolf Harris doing one of his paintings, and I would like to have a try. Please could you fix it for me? Good luck. Love, Lynn. Impossible. How on earth can we get hold of that Mr. Rolf Harris? He's always flying all over the world. As soon as he knew that we needed him for Jim'll Fix It, here he came.
The show was a smash. The mailroom at the BBC received 20,000 letters a week, or about 250,000 a year. It was a feel-good show the whole family could watch together. Children trusted Jimmy. The message was clear. He was always there to listen to them and their most fervent wishes. And, as British TV critic Mark Lawson said,
"A man of the people is allowed near the people. Terrible, terrible things happened because of that."
Jim'll Fix It became a top show in the country in the late 1970s and through the 1980s. By the start of the 1980s, then, Savile was still all over the BBC and everywhere else, all the time. He was being appointed to boards of hospitals and various other charities. He was running marathons and doing Christmas specials as Father Christmas. He was even writing the introduction to a children's book on stranger danger. I'll let that one marinate for a second. It's around this time that the National Health Service in Britain was taking note of their own desperate need to upgrade the facilities and medical equipment at use at Stoke Mandeville, the paralysis hospital. Naturally, they reached out to see if their longtime friend and frequent volunteer Savile might help. He was delighted by the request, putting together a formidable array of small community-based events that included the wealthy, the military, old women who sold knitted goods, and young children who had lemonade stands and bake sales. In 1981, the loosely organized consortium of fundraising entities became the Jimmy Savile Stoke Mandeville Hospital Trust. In 3 years, he raised more than £10 million and ground broke on the new hospital as soon as possible. It's this effort that made him, in Prime Minister Thatcher's eyes, knight-worthy. It was also the thing that made him friends with some other highly placed people, like the Prince of Wales and his lovely wife Diana, who both found him quite charming. Alison Bellamy, who was assigned by her newspaper, the Yorkshire Evening Post, to cover all things Jimmy, became friendly with Savile and was later personally chosen by him to write his biography. She was also, upon his death, given possession of all his papers. Combing through the boxes of correspondence, she found not just the occasional Christmas card, but files of letters between now King Charles and Britain's favorite goofball.
A letter to Jimmy Savile, to his London flat at Park Crescent, written on the 4th of July 1991. Dear Jimmy, I can't tell you how grateful I am for the most useful assistance you provided for my speech in the Guildhall the other day. It really was extremely good of you to take the trouble to put together those splendid notes, and they provided me with considerable food for thought. With renewed and heartfelt thanks, yours ever, Charles.
And this from April 1990.
Seeking Jimmy's advice about a speech, you are so good at understanding what makes people operate and wonderfully sceptical and practical. Can you cast an eye over this draft and let me know how we can best appeal to people on this score?
This letter, like others in their correspondence, was signed affectionately by the future king. In other exchanges, Charles would ask Savile for suggestions about ordinary people he should meet, individuals royalty don't typically encounter, as well as guidelines on how to handle national disasters. And the latter proved crucial when Charles reached out to Savile in December 1988 following the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. The attack killed all 259 people aboard the Frankfurt to Detroit flight, which had stopped in London, plus 11 people on the ground, making it the deadliest terrorist attack in British history. According to Bellamy, Savile became Charles' unofficial chief advisor on handling this national tragedy. Television footage and photographs document the prince conferring with Savile at various locations, including the crash site itself. There's also footage of Savile escorting Prince Charles and Princess Diana through Stoke Mandeville Hospital, introducing them to patients he knew well. The princess was clearly amused by his antics. By 1990, Savile's influence had reached its peak. In the Queen's birthday honors that year, after Margaret Thatcher's persistent lobbying, Queen Elizabeth II finally knighted James Wilson Savile for his charitable services. He wore the appropriate morning tuxedo. He cut his hair. He played to the camera. He bragged. He was Sir Jimmy Savile now. Then, as if Savile had some magic shield against any criminal prosecution, that was followed by a papal knighthood bestowed by Pope John Paul II. The actual award was Knight Commander of the Pontifical Equestrian Order of St. Gregory the Great. It's a mouthful. It was given, of course, for his extraordinary efforts on behalf of charities that benefited the underserved, the sick, and the insane. Savile, still a practicing Catholic, never blinked. And if he hadn't been before, he was now certifiably untouchable. Here's journalist Paul Knew, former editor of the Sunday Mirror, who interviewed some of Savile's alleged victims after his crimes started coming to light.
One of them said to me that this is something I'll never forget. I can almost remember it verbatim. Who's going to believe us, a pair of former approved schoolgirls, when Jimmy Savile is in fact been honoured by the Pope, that he's a friend of Prince Charles and Princess Diana and Margaret Thatcher? Who is going to believe us?
They had a point. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Storyworth. Every year I struggle with what to get my dad for the holidays because he's one of those people who says, I don't need anything, which, helpful, right?
Classic dad move.
Well, one year I gave him Storyworth, which was a gift for him, sure, but it also turned out to be a great gift for me because I learned so much about my dad and his childhood.
How did it work?
Every week, they emailed him a memory-prompting question, stuff like, what were your favorite toys as a kid, or what's something you're most proud of? He would type out these little stories that I had never heard before.
That's awesome. Did he actually stick with it?
He did, and after a year, Storyworth compiled everything into this gorgeous hardcover book, photos, full-color pages, the works. I made copies for all his grandkids. It's easily the most meaningful gift I've ever given.
So it's not just a gift for him, it's one for everyone else too.
Exactly. Give your loved ones a unique keepsake you'll all cherish for years. Storyworth Memoirs. Right now, save $10 or more during their holiday sale when you go to storyworth.com/COTC. That's storyworth.com/COTC to save $10 or more on your order. By 1995, Savile had finished his gig at Top of the Pops and Jim'll Fix It. Both had run 20 years apiece. With his television career winding down, Savile doubled down on what had become his other public persona, the charitable volunteer. By then, he had already established charitable connections with 50 hospitals, all of which began counting on his advice, putting him on their boards, or simply consulting him when they wished to expand or publicize a new initiative. It's notable that on several occasions in public interviews on everything from bright morning shows to serious journalistic inquiries, Savile was asked why he committed so much of his time to charity work. He would always say that he hoped it was a bit of a counterweight to whatever sins he may have committed. He imagined he would get to the pearly gates and St. Peter, or God, or both maybe, would pull out a ledger of his life. He had to make sure the good works column was mighty hefty, he said, because it was the only way to balance out his column of misdeeds. He always said it in a cheeky way, and it never failed to get a laugh from the unsuspecting public. For those who did suspect, however, it had to have only deepened their disdain for the man. No longer on regular BBC programming now, Savile was aging, but when not doing some public appearance, he lolled comfortably in his protected status. He made a few moves to ensure that, like when he invited the West Yorkshire Police in for what he called the Friday Morning Club. The boys would all sit and jaw at Savile's Leeds flat, drinking, exchanging stories, being pals. The strategy paid off. When Scotland Yard's new investigative unit got tips about Savile's crimes against children, they forwarded them to local police for follow-up, which meant they went straight to the West Yorkshire force. There, Savile's Friday Morning Club connections ensured the tips went nowhere. Of course, they didn't say as much out loud. No, they told Mike Hames, the head of the Scotland Yard unit, that the matter was in hand. In 1998, British journalist Ian Hislop brought Savile onto his TV show, and while being asked a few innocuous questions, Hislop became visibly concerned with Savile's answers.
You used to be a wrestler, didn't you?
I still am.
Oh, yeah.
I'm feared in every girls' school in this country.
And this.
Didn't you live in a caravan?
12 years I lived in a motor caravan.
What do you do in the caravan?
Anybody I can lay my hands on.
Now let's go back to earlier this episode when we talked about a young boy whose aunt owned the property on which Duncroft-approved school was housed. That's the school for bright girls with very troubled pasts that sometimes include serious criminality. It's where, even then, a teenage Murray Jones saw things and thought they were amiss. Well, Jones grew up to be an investigative journalist. He was hired by the BBC in 1988. Fast forward to the early 2000s, when the wonders of the World Wide Web were still new. Everyone was exploring and sharing, and social media was rudimentary messaging done by mostly small groups of like-minded people who knew each other in some way. Jones decided to follow up on his decades-old hunch. He began to tiptoe through various chat groups. In most cases, he would just search Duncroft and see what showed up. The girls who had been housed there were women now, and they were talking amongst themselves about many things. One was the abuse they'd received at the hands of Savile and the lack of protection they'd been afforded there because of his monstrous access and his even more monstrous behavior. They were also talking about their shame at having gone along with it for a few cigarettes. Jones moved over to Pop Bitch and Friends Reunited, the first real and big social media platform in Britain, and found similar conversations happening between women. Moving slowly and respectfully, Jones reached out to the women who were extremely reluctant to tell their stories publicly. He understood. He didn't want to do more harm. Almost simultaneously, on October 1st, 2009, the Surrey police brought Savile in for formal questioning. They, too, had seen what the women at Duncroft were saying. Here's an exchange between a detective constable and Savile, taken from the real recording of this investigating session.
What's your full name?
James Wilson Savile.
You said earlier it was okay to call you Jimmy.
That's my name, yes.
He was given what the Brits call a caution. We know it as Miranda rights. Then he was asked,
did you specifically go to Duncroft knowing it was an all-girls place to receive sexual gratification?
That is a complete flight of fantasy.
Because the women were so reluctant to go to trial, it was determined there was little chance of conviction. The matter was set aside. Now, a small note here. The women who had stories to tell believed they were alone, not part of a group of women making the claims. They were afraid. The police didn't tell them that there were others who were similarly afraid that they'd be out on a ledge by themselves. And maybe the women would have talked if they'd known there were more of them ready to open their mouths. Then, on October 29th, 2011, Jimmy Savile, 2 days short of 85, died at home with a cigar burning in his ashtray, his fingers crossed to ensure his safe passage to heaven. There was no hint of the controversy to come.
Veteran broadcaster Jimmy Savile has died at the age of 84. He will be best remembered for his children's TV show Jim'll Fix It, which ran for...
What most of the world didn't know yet, though, was that even before Savile died, Jones had found Karen Ward, who had penned a private online account of what had happened to her at Duncroft. She had filled in the one blank that Jones had not been able to. What happened when the girls got in the Rolls Royce with Savile at the school and left the premises. She explained the horror of the assaults. When Jones had initially found her, she, like the other victims, wouldn't go public. But once Savile died, she told Jones it was time. Ready to roll, Jones's editor at Newsnight, a brave woman named Liz McKean, worked closely with him and booked a run date of December 7th, 2011. They worked tirelessly to ready their explosive report. On November 29th, less than 2 weeks before the expose was set to air, the BBC began to question everything about Jones's story. This is Jones speaking about McKean on Crime Analysts, a British podcast.
Yeah, I mean, she was outraged that our editor talked about the only evidence we had was just the women. That absolutely rightly outraged her. She was volcanically angry about that. And, this is during the phase when we were arguing that the story had to go out, and the BBC was trying to suppress it. And Liz would storm into the editor's office, leave the door open so that the whole office could hear what was being said, and rip into this fundamentally misogynistic attitude. And not just misogynistic, they didn't care about any of the victims. They were weak people, they were poor people, they were unimportant people. And this sort of fundamentally is why the British establishment was not interested in any of these people.
See, by now, the Christmas schedules were out, and the entire month of December was to be a tribute to the heroic but now gone Jimmy Savile. So Jones's story was dead. No one wanted to hear about bad Jimmy. The outpouring of sadness from the British public seemed to prove the BBC's point. Savile's gold coffin was laid in the Leeds City Hall so that mourners could pass. Thousands did. Many followed the procession of the funeral cortege to the cemetery. Tributes poured out of all of the necessary dignitaries. Then Prince Charles said he was saddened. Filmmaker Louis Theroux called him a hero. The head of the Radio Academy wrote of the industry's great loss. Charles Kennedy, a member of Parliament, wrote that Savile was, quote, a true and long-standing friend to the West Highlands over decades of diligence and decency, end quote. Back in London, at BBC's broadcast house, in a small room away from the hubbub of crafting television tributes, Jones and McKean felt they had let the victims down. So, they kept going. Jones and his team went on to find 10 more victims to go on the record. They took all of their research and contacts to ITV, a commercial TV station, which let them dig even further, employing former detective Mark Williams Thomas to investigate. ITV produced an episode of their public affairs TV show, Exposure, on, quote, the other side of Jimmy Savile, end quote. It ran October 3rd, 2012. The long-awaited bomb dropped. The ITV producers had spoken to a wide range of victims and witnesses, but one in particular kind of floored me. In the late 1960s, Wilfred Diath, producer of a BBC radio show called Teen Scene, said he was preparing to interview Savile for his Sunday broadcast.
Well, he had a reputation. I mean, he had a shocking reputation for young women, but I mean, it was all hearsay, and I didn't know whether to believe it or not. As I shall repeatedly say, he never attempted to hide this predilection. So it was generally known that he was into young girls.
Before the recording, Diath said Savile, then in his late 30s, asked him to meet him in a Chinese restaurant in central London. But when he turned up at the Lotus House, he said Savile wasn't alone.
And there he was sitting on a banquette with this very young girl. I would guess she was 12 if you'd asked me to guess. It could be that she was 13, 14, but I was said 12. I asked him where he'd found her. I said that to him, where did you pick her up? And he said, Top of the Pops. I think it was the previous night. Top of the Pops went out on a Thursday night. And I said, I remember saying, is that your happy hunting ground? And he said, yes. And that was the extent of my conversation about the girl, because I found it rather demeaning to be having to talk to him in front of a little girl like that. And then we made an arrangement that I would ring him next morning at the Mascot Hotel. And next morning I rang him and he was obviously in bed with this young girl. In fact, he said he was in bed with her.
The ITV documentary also showed how Savile had reveled in the wool he had pulled over everyone's eyes. Clips throughout the program showed him almost bragging that he was getting away with something unspeakable, hiding his crimes in plain sight through decades of celebrity. Said journalist Jones, quote, the duping delight, the enjoyment. I mean, for me, it talks to the power and control and, most likely, the psychopathy, end quote. The very next day after the documentary aired, Scotland Yard launched what would be called Operation Yewtree, a formal criminal investigation into historic allegations of child sexual abuse by Savile and others. If you read the newspapers in rolling succession, the headlines grow exponentially with every report, starting with something like 12 victims, then 25, then 50. Soon, BBC News anchor Fiona Bruce was telling the public it was 340. Then it became 400. The complaints against Savile flooded police stations and helplines. In January 2013, the official report titled Giving Victims a Voice documented 450 people who had come forward with allegations against Savile, with 214 crimes formally recorded spanning 50 years. His final offense reportedly occurred during the last episode of Top of the Pops when Savile was nearly 80 years old. By 2014, experts quoted in the Guardian newspaper estimated that as many as 1,000 people may have been abused by Savile on BBC premises alone. After that, the BBC went into crisis mode. Initially, the corporation defended its handling of the situation, insisting they had properly investigated Savile during his lifetime and found no evidence of wrongdoing. But under mounting pressure, they were forced to change course. The BBC eventually acknowledged that the decision to suppress Jones's Newsnight investigation had been quote-unquote flawed. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Ollie. You know the hardest part of going away? Missing Ellis and Ripley. We were only gone a few days, but could not stop talking about the dogs.
I know. Every time we saw another dog on the trip, you'd say, that one kind of looks like Ripley, or that one's sitting funny like Ellis.
I mean, they're family, so when we got back, I wanted to make sure they were getting the absolute best, starting with their food, which is why we give them Ollie.
Ollie makes fresh human-grade meals for dogs.
Exactly. Ollie delivers fresh, protein-packed meals made with real human-grade ingredients, crafted by vet nutritionists and culinary experts. Even the pickiest eaters will get excited at mealtime now, and the packaging is perfect. Pre-portioned meals, a scoop, and even a pup-tainer, so no weird fridge smell.
I like that they tailor the meal plan to each dog's needs. Ellis needs joint support, Ripley needs something general on her stomach. They've got both covered.
Your dog's well-being starts with their food, and that's why Ollie delivers fresh, human-grade food that your dog will love. Head to ollie.com/COTC, tell them all about your dog, and use code COTC to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back.
That's OLLIE.com/COTC. Enter code COTC to get 60% off your first box. Ellis and Ripley definitely approve.
After the revelations of the dark side of Jimmy Savile, the British government scrambled to respond. Prime Minister David Cameron asked if Savile's various British honors and his knighthood might be rescinded by the Honors Forfeiture Committee. Told that no such procedure existed because the honors expire upon the recipient's death, the committee ultimately issued a statement confirming that, had Savile's behavior been revealed during his lifetime, forfeiture proceedings would most certainly have commenced. A November 2012 Guardian story reported that investigators in Jimmy Savile's case were looking into the possibility he was linked to Manchester's criminal underworld. It was one of more than 400 lines of inquiry investigators were following up on. The conclusion on the mob front seemed to be that Savile had told victims he was linked to the underworld as a means to further intimidate them. Commander Peter Spindler called the abuse, quote, vast, predatory, and opportunistic, end quote. The BBC Trust commissioned a report to review their own failings. Dame Janet Smith's inquiry took almost 4 years, cost £6.5 million, and was 1,000 pages long and included testimony from 700 people. Of those, 117 witnesses were from the BBC, and had, according to the broadcast giant's own story, at the very least heard the rumors. This is an excerpt from a 2016 story. Quote, they included 2 BBC managers who had confronted Savile over claims he took teenagers home from Top of the Pops, claims which Savile admitted, but said he was simply giving the girls a bed for the night because they had nowhere to stay, end quote. Smith's inquiry also included the sexually inappropriate actions of Stuart Hall, also a BBC TV presenter, who was jailed in 2013 for sexual offenses against children. Some BBC staff knew Hall was bringing underage girls to his dressing room, Smith's investigation revealed, but his celebrity status prevented formal complaints from reaching senior management. Likewise, in looking at the culture at the BBC, Smith found inordinate deference to Savile, with some employees fearing for their jobs if they reported his crimes. So, he was allowed to keep abusing children. The youngest of his victims at the network was 8 years old. After the allegations about Savile had been overwhelmingly confirmed, the Archbishop of Westminster asked the Vatican to annul the papal knighthood. The Vatican responded that such honors, like those of the secular knighthood, expire with the recipient. Papal spokesman said that, of course, if the allegations had been known in 1990, no such knighthood would have occurred. Now, while he was alive, Savile had requested and even paid for a tribute to himself to be erected upon his death. It was an elaborate headstone costing £4,000, made from ornate black granite and steel. The triumphant monument listed his vast array of accomplishments, as well as gold-embossed words he wished to impart on the grieving nation. It read, quote, "It was good while it lasted," end quote. In the aftermath, it was quickly dismantled, removed, destroyed, and dumped in a garbage landfill at the request of his family. His casket was similarly relocated to prevent it from being unearthed or worse. It wasn't long before British academics were weighing in. Chris Greer, a professor of sociology at the University of Essex, and Eugene McLaughlin, a criminologist and co-director of the Centre for Crime and Justice at the University of London, put blame squarely on Savile, but made clear they had no pity for the harm done by the many British institutions that had enabled and even encouraged him. They told The Guardian, for example, that, quote, validation from the BBC was crucial to Savile becoming a celebrity personality, and the corporation's support continued to underpin his charmed career, end quote. The lessons left behind were hard ones, but it can't be said they weren't valuable. Mark Williams Thomas, the former police officer who did the digging for ITV, spoke about the aftermath of the Savile case to the Modern Wisdom podcast.
I think if it hadn't been for Jimmy Savile's exposure, I wonder whether Weinstein and the other individuals who have now been exposed, Epstein, would actually have taken place. Because what it did do is it created a tidal shift of attitudes and approach from victims up to authorities who said, you know what, we now need to get a hold of this and we now need to start to listen to people who are telling us about what's going on. You know, no longer should people be untouchable.
I want to note one other parallel with Harvey Weinstein, by the way. In both the Savile and Weinstein cases, some celebrities did try to tell the world what was happening long before it was uncovered. You might remember that Courtney Love faced professional retaliation after she gave this advice to would-be starlets.
Harvey Weinstein invites you to a private party in the Four Seasons, okay?
That was, if Harvey Weinstein invites you to a private party at the Four Seasons, don't go. Well, it turned out that John Lydon, aka Johnny Rotten of Sex Pistols fame, had tried to tell the world via a BBC interview in 1978 about Savile. The comment he made wasn't aired at the time, and he was banned by the station afterward. Finally, after Savile's reputation had been safely demolished, Piers Morgan had Johnny on as a guest and aired what he had said more than 3 decades earlier. You can hear it here, along with Johnny's response upon hearing it again. That's the "weren't I right?" plus applause from Morgan's audience.
I'd like to kill Jimmy Savile. I think he's a hypocrite.
Weren't I right?
I bet he's into all kinds of seediness that we all know about, but not allowed to talk about. I know some rumours. I bet none of this will be allowed out.
I should imagine libelous stuff will be allowed out.
Nothing I said is liable.
Imagine how many victims might have been spared had people just been willing to listen. In May 2015, per the New York Times, police in the UK released new data that suggested the Savile case, quote, helped transform the attitudes of many victims and also led to a greater willingness to report abuse, end quote. Chief Constable Simon Bailey, speaking for the National Police Chiefs Council, said, quote, what we are seeing is an absolutely unprecedented increase in the number of reports that are coming forward, end quote. The true scale of Savile's crimes may never be known. While the working number stands at shy of 500 victims, law enforcement officials note that sexual assault is typically underreported by a factor of 3 or 4. Some investigators estimate that, accounting for victims who surely died before Savile and repeated assaults against the same children, the number of victims and individual assaults could reach into the thousands. What's most baffling to me in hindsight is just how often and blatantly Savile told on himself in his lifetime. There's a line in his biography that quotes him as saying, I really do hope God takes it easy on sinners. Well, I really hope he doesn't. To report this episode, journalist Amy Wilson read Untouchable Jimmy Savile by Sean Atwood, while Amber referenced In Plain Sight, The Life and Lies of Jimmy Savile by Dan Davies. Amy also watched the Netflix documentary Jimmy Savile, A British Horror Story, and made use of the internet, which is full of British interviews with Savile and clips of his antics, his walkabouts with royals, and his continued adulation by adoring fans. She also read and watched the vast array of television and newspaper coverage after the ITV documentary aired in the UK. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Join us at patreon.com/GrabBagCollab to hear not just exclusive content related to this show, but to also get access to several other shows on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this show was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Amanda Rossman and Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and occasionally by my son, Hunt Van Ben Scoten. Other music comes from Soundstripe and Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com.